Howdy y'all, my name is Kyle Cones and today I will be presenting to you biofuels. So in order to understand what biofuels are, you kind of have to break it down. And when they say it's in the name, it really is. Because if you look at it, if you break it down into its roots, biofuels is just bio, which means life, so that's you or me, or anybody gigging them, and fuels, which is just something that provides energy for an action. So think of your car moving on the highway. It's moving due to the fuel being injected and used in order to produce movement. So biofuels derive from something called biomass. So biomass is really just any organic matter, which just means living or not living, that can be used in order to create a biofuel, or just any number of things. So the example right here is corn, because that's very important for my biofuel, which is going to be ethanol. So I will explain that more in the next part of this video, but in essence, a biomass can be converted into a biofuel through processes of photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Howdy y'all, now that I've described to you what biofuels are, I'm going to describe to you my specific one and where it comes from. So mine is ethanol, and ethanol derives from this thing called corn, which you've probably heard about before. Corn is a stalk-like vegetable which grows upward, and its products produce out its sides. So corn, like all plants, uses something called photosynthesis as well as cellular respiration. So photosynthesis is just the intake of certain reactants in order to form the sugar called glucose. So specifically, that's H2O, CO2, and energy from the sun. So it takes these things, it performs a process with its photosystems, and it produces this thing called glucose, which is then used by the process of cellular respiration in order to make the plant grow. Because cellular respiration turns that glucose into ATP, which the cell then uses, the cell, as in the entire plant, uses in order to grow outward. So the vegetable is a result of cellular respiration, but the entire process uses photosynthesis and cellular respiration. So corn really loves these warm and sunny climates. So think places like the Midwest or down south, those are perfect places for the corn to grow. Howdy y'all, now that we've described where ethanol comes from and what biofuels are, we can get on how to actually make this ethanol. So ethanol is made through a 5-step process that starts with milling. So milling is just breaking it down into these tiny, tiny particles. And so, as you can see, the corn doesn't like that. But what that does is, it allows it to separate to where it can enter into cooking/gelatinization. So gelatinization allows this thing called starch, which is a store of glucose energy, to separate from everything else. And this is very useful because it allows that energy to become easily accessible. And so this proceeds into saccharification, which is just hydrolysis. It breaks down those long starch chains into glucose, the monomer. So then it proceeds into something called fermentation, because it's now able to, because you have glucose. And so fermentation is just a form of cellular respiration that happens in the absence of oxygen. So it takes in these reactants, which are yeast and the glucose monomers, and it turns that into energy in the form of alcohol. So that's alcohol fermentation, which is used in ethanol. And there's another form called lactic acid, which is not used. So now you have your ethanol all separated out, but it's still diluted by a bunch of water. And so that's where distillation comes in. Distillation removes the water from the ethanol by heat. So as you can see, the water evaporates away. And now you have that concentrated ethanol. And ethanol can be used for a variety of things, which I will get into next. So now that we know what ethanol is, let's learn what it's used for. So it's been used since 1826 in order to power an engine. And so in turn, it's grown into this huge industry, which really blew up during the 1970s. It's used basically everywhere nowadays. It's used in your alcohol, it's used in your medicine, and it's used in your gas as an additive. And that's huge. And the reason it's done so is because ethanol has 44% to 52% lower greenhouse gas emissions than just straight gasoline. And so in turn, this leads to a significantly reduced carbon footprint. But this industry has blown up. It's created 407,000 jobs overall. And just last year, $37 billion was spent on its industry, just buying biomass. And it's used in 98% of all gasoline, because at least that much has 10% ethanol. And that's huge. And it leads into what I think about it and my plan of action. So lastly, ethanol is constantly communicated to the public in the form of gas stations and in the form of gas. It's essential to the everyday function of the world. And because of that, it's really, really important. But I think eventually if we have that infinite funding, we should basically phase it out. We should move into more efficient things like electric vehicles, because it's still bad for the environment. And that's really all I have for you today about ethanol.